Good afternoon, everyone, and happy Earth Day. I am Glenna Milberg. I'm with WPLG Local 10 News in South Florida, and I will be moderating today's panel on America's Everglades, a massive, huge, unbelievable undertaking. And these two men that you see right now are going to be talking all about it and kind of wowing you with some facts and figures. And so we'll start on this fourth day of the Volo Foundation's Florida Climate Week. We've heard many important presentations and discussions this week about climate change and sea level rise and the need to build resilience throughout South Florida. And many are wondering, what can we do about it? Many are doing things about it every single day. And obviously, everything in this peninsula of a state is tied to the environment, whether it is the economy or social health or the environment itself. Tourism, it is all tied to the water supply, which is all tied to the Everglades. The Everglades ensures clean water for the environment and protects the water supply from saltwater intrusion for 9 million people in South Florida. So for South Florida, we know much of this is addressed through Everglades Restoration, a massive and overdue modernization of the water infrastructure. And that protects us from flooding, but also a much bigger and more important thing, conserving water for the environment and the water supply for the next couple of generations and beyond. So for this panel discussion, we're going to discuss the science and the policy needed to complete what is the largest environmental restoration in the world, in America's Everglades. And we'll also talk about what restoration means in a changing climate and with rising levels. So this afternoon, we're joined by two Everglades Foundation staff members. Eric Eichenberg is the Chief Executive Officer, and Dr. Steve Davis is the VP of Communications and Engagement, and also the Senior Ecologist and South Florida's greatest minds on Everglades restoration. So it's great to be with you both. And so I want to start out with, I'm going to throw that up there and you all can, I want to hear both of your perspectives. We were just out there for a little tiny piece of the restoration project, which we can talk about more. But the whole concept of Everglades restoration is because man carved up the Everglades for development. And so now man and woman is undoing what humankind has done in the Everglades. And I'd like you to sort of take the big picture for a moment and explain like why we're doing what we're doing.
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Glenna, and thanks for joining us. And I want to salute the Volo Foundation for its commitment to improving our planet, raising the issues relating to climate, and certainly their support of Everglades restoration. Great partners in this effort. You're right. We are fixing the sins of previous generations, and the irony is we have the same agencies that caused some of the drainage or the destruction that are now restoring it. So we're at this. It is the largest restoration project in the history of the world. It is the water supply, as you point out, for almost 9 million people. But what we're trying to do here is re-engineer the way water flows on the peninsula. We waste billions of gallons of fresh water every single year. That precious resource that is the lifeblood of South Florida, we need to ensure that we have an abundant supply of it, not just for the environment, but for our economic well-being, for the population growth that we have. As a state that does not have an income tax, we rely upon tourism. We rely upon property tax. We need to ensure that we have clean water. So we are optimistic that here on this Climate Week, as we celebrate Earth Day, Everglades restoration is being pursued with a sense of urgency. And again, it's to take water, store, clean it, and send that water south through the Florida Peninsula and ultimately down to Everglades National Park and the Florida Keys.
Steve, you want to handle the big picture to kick us off also?
Well, I'll just add to that you know, those changes to the Everglades, you know, really began over 100 years ago, and the efforts to drain the swamp and access the soils that at that time were more valuable for agriculture and for development than we ever thought they would be. And the changes in water management, the changes in flows It was to get rid of water. The idea was to drain the Everglades, get rid of that water because it was valueless. And of course, as our population grew, as we developed in South Florida, and obviously have this wonderful climate down here and beautiful beaches, people flock to South Florida. And we're seeing to this day an increasing immigration of folks that want to live down here and enjoy that. But that infrastructure that really allowed South Florida to be developed is really undermining its future today. And it's because of the way water's managed, it's because of the pollution in the ecosystem. And Everglades restoration is really, as Eric mentioned, about re-engineering the flow of water, working with what remains of the Everglades. And we have about 50% of it left. So restoring the flow of water, making sure that water is clean, sending it south back to the Everglades, all the way down to Everglades National Park in Florida Bay. That's a distance of over 100 miles. So we have a lot of this ecosystem left that we need to protect, and we have the confidence that we're doing the right thing.
The vastness of the Everglades and the monumental sort of historic project is really hard to visualize for people who aren't in it. And we were out there, we were talking a little bit before the panel. The governor brought a contingent of people, Army Corps of Engineers, South Florida Water Management District, to one particular place a few weeks ago for sort of a look at taking up the old Tamiami Trail that's almost 100 years old, paved from I guess, Miami area to Naples, clear across the Everglades, that acts kind of like a dam that shuts down the water flow that you were talking about. And I know a few years ago, some of the Tamiami Trail was raised bridges. And I want to give that mental image of how this dam is being lifted, which has stopped the water flow south from Lake Okeechobee that you were talking about. Talk about how difficult that has been in fits and starts, and how it's going.
Well, let me just say, before Steve gives maybe the scientific impact of that decision, that strip of asphalt that was placed in the late 1920s to connect Tampa to Miami, Tamiami, it decapitated the flow of water. And for then decades, we were experiencing drought conditions down in the Everglades National Park in Florida Bay. And the way the example is, those with kids, kids are in the tub, you pull the plug in the tub and you drain out the tub, you drain the water out of the bathtub. This is significant. And Glenna, the idea of bridging Tamiami Trail was first pursued in the mid 1980s. It was approved by Congress in 1989. So here we are all these decades later, and we're now reaping the benefits of these important bridges. So water is flowing under those bridges for the first time in 100 years. It is significant. And if folks don't really understand the complexity of the Everglades, all they need to look is the bridges along Tamiami Trail and the importance that they bring.
And we're seeing that those bridges are working. Immediately downstream of those bridges, those wetlands are now hydrated for months more out of the year than they were prior to those bridges being built. And that's without any additional flow coming from Lake Okeechobee to the south yet. So we haven't even talked about restoration of flow, and yet these bridges are already working to equalize the water on both sides of that road. And I'll just say that, you're right. It took us nearly 20 years to get that first bridge underway. It was conceived in the late 1980s, and it wasn't until 2011, 2012 where we really started to see that progress of getting that first bridge built. The second one happened in an instant. The remaining projects are, one, as you observed, removing that old roadbed near the entrance of Shark Valley. That's going to help to spread out the flow into that area of Everglades National Park, and then raising the roadbed between the bridges that have been built further to the east, and that's going to allow us to raise water levels to a restoration target. So we're seeing the benefits. It used to be you could stand on one side of Tamiami Trail, the water was so backed up it would be up to your waist. you would go to the other side of the road, walk out, and you would barely get your shoes wet. We're
Hmm.
seeing that's changing today because of those bridges.
And I want to sort of segue into a couple of things that brings up. Number one, the flow is, I want to talk about scientifically why the flow is important, because that goes to cleanliness and also hydration, and also action and reaction. By doing this, it sort of prevents a backup to the water that's been affecting other waterways and the lake, is my sort of very limited understanding. So I think it's really interesting to delve into how for every action like that, there is a reaction around the state that's equally as important.
Well, as we were saying earlier, to really get a perspective on the Everglades, you need to see it from above.
Yes.
And one way that everyone can see it from above is on Google Earth. All you have to do is zoom in to the Everglades and zoom out, and you'll see that these habitats, tree islands, ridges of sawgrass, and sloughs are all oriented in the direction of flow. And these are habitats that were created, really shaped over centuries by that gradual sheet flow of water through the river of grass. And because we've built those dams like Tamiami Trail, we've stopped the flow. We've created areas that are too deep, say on one side of Tamiami Trail, areas that are too dry on the other side. And as a result, we're losing those habitats. And it's one thing to just say we're losing habitats and, what do we do about that? But those habitats directly relate to the functionality of the ecosystem, because those habitats working in concert with the natural rise and fall of water across the Everglades, that's what really gives rise to the wading birds and the alligators and helps to concentrate the food that they depend on for their nesting. It's just an amazing ecosystem when it's operating at its best. And we know the consequence of our actions. And that's why restoration is really working to restore that flow, to get more water south, to open up those barriers to flow. And we're confident, that we're headed in the right direction.
Certainly the circle of life and Mother Nature and all its beings. And there's sort of another component, Eric, of what we've been seeing in past, especially past summers on the east and west coasts of Florida, where the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie rivers flow out toward east, west, and east. And the pollution there is directly related to the backup of water, is it not?
Well, and Glenna, you raise a point that folks are probably seeing more than they wish, is nutrient pollution, runoff from agricultural use, primarily north of Lake Okeechobee. When that pollution hits the rivers and estuaries and heads into the lake itself, it creates these algal blooms. So as water is stored in Okeechobee and not moved south, which it needs to do, and we get these hot summer months, hot temperatures, algae starts to form. And unfortunately today, when Okeechobee fills up, the only option that the colonel of the Army Corps of Engineers has in his toolbox is to open the gates on the east and west side of the lake. And billions of gallons of polluted water decimates the local economy, the local ecology. It's a threat to human health. Health departments putting signs up telling people to stay out of the water. From our perspective, this is 2021. We've had enough of these experiences. We know what the solution is: the hydrological re-engineering of the Everglades. It's scientifically based, and not only by storing, cleaning, and sending that water south where it's needed. The Florida Keys needs the water. Miami, Broward, Palm Beach, they need the water to flow south for our water supply. And by doing so, you're not only recharging the aquifer, but when that aquifer pushes east, it's a buffer against rising sea levels. It's an effort on resiliency matters that are taking shape. So this is our moment, but it's also vitally important to solve the problems that you've just raised.
You can't see the aquifer from Google Earth, can you? So that's a whole other story.
No, you can't. But what would it be like if we turned our tap on in our kitchen and the water doesn't flow? When people do that, and we take for granted when we turn on the tap, that's water from the aquifer, it's from the Everglades.
You know, you make such a good point, because I think a lot of people who are going to be watching this panel and all the panels this week are people who are interested and who know how important this is. I think the challenge is to get it out to the general population who are so busy with their daily lives to really bring it home. And that's why when they see pollution for themselves in a river, they smell the muck, you know, only when it's a personal sort of in your face reaction do people really start to understand the big picture importance of Everglades restoration. So make a really good point. Steve, you know, we talked about sending the water south and for cleaning purposes and hydrating purposes. And you mentioned storage, but that's a very big deal project, the storage component of Everglades restoration. Talk about that a little bit and what it is and how it happens and why.
Well, so again, there's a recognition that we're working with half the Everglades. It's disconnected from Lake Okeechobee, its historic headwater supply, and it's compartmentalized. And that's what we did in beginning in the 1940s, really to accommodate agriculture and development at that time. So what Everglades restoration as a plan really is, it's a massive water storage plan. It's first recognizing that, as Eric mentioned, we're dumping all that polluted water to the east and the west. That's a precious resource, even in a polluted state. That's fresh water. And we are blessed to have close to 5 feet of rainfall every year. We need to keep that on the Florida Peninsula for ourselves, for our water supply, but also for the environment. What storage allows is it provides water managers with an alternative. Currently, the only alternative, as Eric mentioned, is to dump that water to the Caloosahatchee and to the St. Lucie. Having a massive rain barrel to put that water, rather than dumping it, allows you to hold on to it when it's in abundance and then draw from that to send that water south to the Everglades during the dry season when it's needed most. And that's something that the historic Everglades did on its own. Because it was so massive, it would feed on itself through the dry season. It would stay hydrated throughout the year. Now, because it's disconnected, it goes through that extreme wet and extreme dry down. And there are certainly consequences of that, not just habitat loss, but fire, carbon emissions. These peat soils oxidize, break down, release more CO2 to the atmosphere. So what storage allows is a place to draw water from when it's otherwise not available. Because the water is polluted, though, I just want to make clear, because the water is polluted, we have to clean it. And we've talked about that, but the way we clean that water is through massive treatment wetlands, using the functionality of wetlands to remove contaminants from water, so that as the water passes through this 70,000 acre network of treatment marshes, it comes out clean enough for the Everglades on the other end.
How does that work? The treatment marshes, I'm guessing that, you know, you don't add like salt and vinegar to them. How does that scientifically work?
It's fascinating. You add water and you manage them in such a way. Wetlands are fascinating. They have this capacity to sequester nutrients, to sequester carbon. So water quality improvement is an important ecological trait of wetlands. And so we use them and engineer them to really optimize that aspect.
And the storage is not, you know, it's not a closet that you open up and put some water in. I mean, that's a kind of a bowl, right? A natural bowl that's being built. Give us the mental image
a miniature Lake Okeechobee. It's really, we're talking about this reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee is about 10,000 acres in size. So that's a massive footprint with 24 feet of water at sometimes on it.
Wow. You know, there is I'm thinking of the recent disaster in the making over on the West Coast near Tampa with the old phosphorus gypsum stacks that are collapsing and polluting the water. Is there any sort of lesson learned here for the Everglades projects going on, is that it's got to be connected in some way. And I'm just sort of, pardon me for going rogue for a minute off the top of my head, but the ecology and environment in Florida is so interconnected. Are there any implications for the Everglades from what's going on there?
Eric, you want to start with that? Or?
Eric, sorry.
Well, I think I'll let Steve answer the implications on the Everglades as far as the footprint of the Everglades itself. But anytime you see a waterway impaired here in Florida, it hurts. We see just south of Manatee County there along the Caloosahatchee, we talked about it, the people of Fort Myers, Naples, when that toxic blue-green algae hits with red tide, it's pouring gasoline on a raging fire. So again, these are man-made disasters. Lake Okeechobee is man-made in the sense that we were polluting it for many, many years. We continue to pollute it with the water pouring in. This gypsum example that you've just addressed there in Piney Point, I think that has at least raised the concern amongst Floridians all across the state that sometimes these ticking time bombs can result in what we're seeing, damage to our water quality and our ecosystem. I would just say to you, Glenna, when you're standing in a Stewart Marina like I was a couple years back, and you're smelling, it takes your breath away of toxic blue-green algae, guacamole looking on the surface of the water. And it was heartbreaking to hear small business owners, people that have dedicated their lives on the water, the bait shop owners who are not seeing business because who wants to fish or recreate on a toxic lake or river? So again, these issues are ringing the alarm bells here to say we have to fix it. And Everglades restoration is a great testament to the ingenuity of the human mind and the human spirit, quite frankly. And we're as optimistic as we've been that this generation is finally going to do it.
Steve?
Yeah, I'll just add, with respect to the reservoir that we're talking about, say, south of Lake Okeechobee, this is a very different situation, because even though you're talking about a reservoir that has levees that's stacking water on the landscape, it's really plugged into a network of canals, both upstream and downstream, and it's designed to really move water through it as much as possible. In some cases, it could just be a very temporary hold spot for water. So it's really designed to be as flow through as much as possible. And so it has pumps and gates that allow water managers to move water very efficiently, both in and out of it, so that you can clean that water, send it to the Everglades. So it's not meant to be this static, tank of water for decades. The other thing to keep in mind is that we're talking about modern dam safety standards that go into the design and the construction, the maintenance and inspection of these structures. And I'll say that the Corps of Engineers, they went back to the drawing board after Hurricane Katrina, and they reevaluated all their dam safety standards. That goes into the design and even the consideration of projects like this before they move forward. So we're very confident that, not only is this a much better designed project than something like that at Piney Point, but it's also really designed to move water rather than just hold it into perpetuity.
So all of these projects and plans that have been around, as you've been talking about, for decades, certainly since the Clinton administration, the comprehensive restoration plans have been in place. Fits and starts, big movement, some years, some none, and that all has to do with money and politics, just like everything else. And I want to talk a little bit, Eric, if you would, about, right now we have a governor who has made the Everglades and environment since the second day of his administration a priority. It looks like we're in the legislative session right now. It looks like both the Senate and the House are fully behind, fully requested, maybe even a little more, Everglades restoration funding. It must be a full-time job for you to keep that going. Talk a little bit about the funding and the politics behind it.
Like the game we played as kids, remember whack-a-mole? You hit it once and something pops up that you have to go chase. So listen, when the governor took office in his inaugural address, he laid out a clear message that the environment was going to be center stage. He called for $2.5 billion in spending for the environment, for the Everglades. And as you mentioned, with the legislature underway, the numbers look good. But the numbers are there because voters stood up in 2014. 75% of Floridians voted to amend the state constitution, which is what we call Amendment 1. So for every time we transact real estate here in the state of Florida, a third of the documentary stamp tax revenue goes into this this account that is for our environment, for Everglades restoration, to build these projects that we're talking about in the comprehensive plan, to make sure we have water quality, to make sure our beaches are first class, to deal with our natural springs. So voters stepped up, and then to have a governor now come behind that action to say, nope, we're going to put the money where our mouth is here. We're going to be committed to it. Governor DeSantis has really moved the needle in a significant way. We're also now enthused by the Biden administration coming in to say, we also need to work on our infrastructure needs. This is water infrastructure, Glenna. We have big needs to make sure these projects are built on time. It's a bipartisan issue, Republican, Democrat. Water, we all need it regardless of your political affiliation. So we're delighted that both parties are stepping up in this way.
You know, as a quasi-political reporter, one of my many hats, I rarely get to report on any issue that has full bipartisan support that everybody agrees on. And for sure, this is one of them. When we were in the Everglades at the Tamiami Trail event that I mentioned earlier in this panel, I asked Governor DeSantis whether he had been in touch with anyone in the Biden administration or the president himself, specifically about the funding for Everglades restoration. He said he had not. It is not a surprise to say that our governor has a national stage. He is a political figure. I have covered him enough to know he's very careful about what he says and when he says it when it comes to politics. And I wonder if it concerns you that in our divided times, even the best of intentions by people of every party, if politics will get in the way.
Well, I've been around this issue for a number of years, and I came up watching very closely how Florida Congressman Clay Shaw handled the issue. And Clay Shaw, who my political mentor, crossed the aisle. He worked with Democrats, worked with Senator Graham on this comprehensive plan when it passed and President Clinton signed it. So as far as our current day politics, we had a significant achievement just a couple of weeks ago, where the entire Florida delegation, from the most conservative to the most liberal, all came together in a letter to the president asking for $725 million in an annual appropriation for the next fiscal year. That doesn't happen every day. But as you say, Everglades restoration has been a unifying issue amongst Florida politicians for many, many years. The governor understands now that we have a different party in the White House. Both sides are working to what's in the best interest of Florida. I'm confident that at the end of the day, the divisions that we see, we can't control elsewhere. But when it comes to our water, when it comes to our environment, when it comes to the Everglades, it is truly nonpartisan.
Steve, what's next? What's left? Where do we go from here?
Well, we've talked about the reservoir project south of Lake Okeechobee. That is a project that includes its own treatment marsh. We talked about those earlier. The Water Management District broke ground on that stormwater treatment area that will help to clean up the water that comes out of that reservoir and drawing on that greater capacity that we have existing out there today. That project will be finished next year. We're awaiting the funding for the Corps of Engineers to begin construction on that deep water reservoir. There are a number of other projects around South Florida as part of the comprehensive Everglades restoration plan that have also been authorized by Congress. There's a reservoir along the Caloosahatchee River. There's a reservoir and stormwater treatment marsh along the C-44 that feeds into the St. Lucie. We have projects where our office is down in Miami, Biscayne Bay coastal wetlands. The projects along Tamiami Trail are yet to be completed, but we're close to the finish line there. There's a project in Collier County called Picayune Strand, which is a massive 55,000 acre habitat restoration project that helps to benefit flows going through that Western Everglades all the way down into the 10,000 islands. So we're talking about projects that benefit our coastline from Boca Grande and Santa Fe Captiva all the way around the Florida Keys and back up to Hutchinson Island. So it's really an amazing program, covers a massive area, and we all benefit from this. So all that to say, these projects are moving forward. At this point, it's just a matter of getting the funding needed to complete them.
I was just going to say, I hope the Biden administration comes through with that, that money. Looks like we're going to need it. Everglades restoration, sort of the elephant, and how do you eat an elephant one part at a time? That's kind of I'm thinking about when I'm listening to you. So
that
how
massive,
does yeah? So I drive around town. I like to say I report from every zip code in South Florida. I've been seeing a lot of cranes lately, and on one hand, development and investments and people moving down. It's great that we're a growing, thriving region in many respects, but boy, what does that do to stress what the Everglades has to supply for us, Eric?
Well, great question. Great question. And as that population boom continues and the cranes pop up, it allows us to double down in the message of investing in infrastructure, water infrastructure, make sure we have a sustainable water supply for the population for this growth. We certainly don't want growth going into the Everglades. So those that are watching in South Florida, we've got an urban development line here in Dade County. It needs to stay where it is. It cannot encroach further into the Everglades or east towards Biscayne Bay.
Do you get blowback on that? Do you get
No, well, listen, developers there are developers that are always looking to pursue a change in the UDB, the urban development boundary. We have a new county commission, as you know, here in Miami-Dade. So we're having conversations there. But developers, one of our co-founders was a developer. George Barley was a developer from Orlando. We have developers who are part of this organization who support it. They understand the connection between a healthy environment and smart development. So this all can work together. This can certainly be there's synergy there, but we have to ensure we have the infrastructure. We're asking for $5 billion in this infrastructure package that the president unveiled. And Glenna, on page 7 of that White House document, it references the Everglades as a national example of how to invest in infrastructure. So we have momentum, both on the funding, on the infrastructure debate, but it needs to keep up with a growing population.
Yeah, I'm going to look up page 7. I haven't seen that. Thanks. Love those details. Oh, so Steve, how do you get people involved? People who are not going to be part of the Volo Foundation's panel this week because they're busy, they haven't really clued in, they really are good people with good intentions. How do you get everybody on board? How do you get that awareness out? How do you get activity in?
Well, I would say that during this COVID period, a silver lining has been that we can do a lot of virtual briefings and help to educate folks as to why this is important, how it affects them, whether they're a resident of South Florida or not. This is an iconic place that we're protecting through Everglades restoration, a national park that was established because of its biological diversity and resources, a World Heritage Site, as Eric mentioned earlier. So we try to get the word out as much as we can. We encourage people to reach out to us. Check us out online, evergladesfoundation.org. Follow us on social media. There's a lot of great resources and ways for folks to get connected to this issue. If you're an advocate and really want to take action on this, text the word water to 52886. And you can let your elected officials know that Everglades restoration matters to you. that you can actually take action and trigger letters to your elected officials. That's an important and very easy way of engaging.
Well, I know just by being in touch with our elected officials every so often, just for what I do on a day-to-day basis, it sounds like everyone's on board.
Yes, we would concur with that. You just can't take your eye off the ball. So and we're working with delegation, but Glenna, also we're engaging with members of Congress from other states. And the beauty is they have constituents that are down here as tourists often. So they know the importance of Florida. Electorally, Florida is very important with our electoral votes. So we're in a good position. We just have to maximize the opportunities and carry it out.
Florida, Florida, Florida.
That's right.
And really in so many ways, Florida is the bellwether state for the rest of the country. So any parting thoughts that I didn't think to ask, Steve?
Well, I'll just add that as we look ahead and learning more about climate change, understanding the impacts of sea level rise, the feedback that we get from the greater scientific community and even esteemed bodies like the National Academies of Science, they tell us that Everglades restoration is really in our best interest from a resilience perspective. It's essential to protect our water supply, and that if anything, we should be moving faster. So the science is all pointing in the direction of Everglades restoration.
And we are all about science. Eric, give the CEO the last word.
Well, the next generation, it's going to be important that we pass this on to the next generation. And the parents that might be listening, even students who might be watching and listening to this, the Everglades Foundation has a robust curriculum. Our evergladesLiteracy.org website provides lesson plans to teachers. This is all free material. It's all aligned to the standards here in Florida, but we want to make sure that every child in this state is literate on the importance of the Everglades, so that when we do restore the Everglades and when this generation succeeds in the construction and the re-engineering of the way water flows, we're going to pass that baton to those that are in school today, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school, and they're going to carry this on. And this is a perpetual investment that we have to keep, because as we saw a century ago, there's always threats. There's threats yesterday. There's threats 5-6 months ago. There's always going to be threats, but we want to make sure the next generation is suited and ready to carry this on. It's a great program, and we encourage schools and teachers to engage.
Everglades Literacy. I love it. A whole curriculum on a living, breathing part of our state. Eric Eichenberg, Steve Davis, the Everglades Foundation. So great to be with you for this hour. And thank you to the Volo Foundation for doing this. I'm Glenna Milberg with WPLG Local 10 News. Happy Earth Day, everyone.
Take care. Thank you, Glenna.